Hello, and welcome to the Dance Physio Podcast, a podcast designed to explore ideas and foster discussion around dancer health and wellness. We're here to challenge the status quo, bridge the gap between dance science and the studio, and help change the landscape of the dance industry for the better. I'm your host, Erica Mayall, a dancer turned physiotherapist who is deeply passionate about leaving the dance world better than I found it. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dance Physio Podcast. I'm your host, Erica Mayall, and I'm so glad you've joined me today because we have another guest on the show, and I'm really excited to introduce you guys all to her. So today, joining me is Ellen Waller, and Ellen is a longtime competitive and professional Irish dancer and instructor and has dedicated her life to Irish dance. Her talent as a dancer has led her to perform for thousands across the world, and her passion as an Irish dance instructor has influenced innumerable young dancers. As a young dancer, Ellen recognized the unique physical and mental challenges encountered by elite dancers and athletes. Determined to learn more about supporting young dancers and athletes, she returned to school to complete her Master's of Science in Exercise Science. Coupling her in-depth experience as an Irish dancer and instructor with her expansive knowledge of kinesiology, Ellen developed the innovative Target Training Program, which is a series of courses and training methods that condition the specific muscles that Irish dancers need to optimize performance, improve their technique, reduce their risk of injuries, overcome physical and mental challenges, and perform and compete at the elite level. So, welcome to the show, Ellen. I am so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm a big fan of the pod.
Thank you. And I think a lot of people have maybe heard some of our previous conversations on like Instagram and things like that. So we definitely have really similar passions and interests when it comes to like dancer health and wellness and dance science and things like that. So I think this is going to be a really fun conversation today. Just to start things off, and just so the listeners can get to know you a little bit better, can you tell us a little bit about your introduction to Irish dance, like sort of how that came about, when you first fell in love with it, just kind of your early story?
I went to a family party, and we were celebrating a man who was both Irish and German. And so they had German dancers, they had Irish dancers. My family is of German ancestry. And I'm watching that. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. I like that. And then the Irish dancers came out. And I remember it so clearly. I remember like the tap of the shoes. I remember what they were doing, being just absolutely captivated by it and obsessed with it. And once they finished, I looked at my parents and like, I have to Irish dance. They were like, well, we're German. And this is long before river dance, where it became more popular, and they're like, I think the only people who Irish dance are Irish people. They're like, but we'll talk to the teacher. She was a dietitian and worked at the hospital with my dad. So she was a family friend of ours. They called her up and she's like, yeah, bring her in. And ever since that first day, I've just been obsessed with it and in love with everything about it and kind of my journey through it. Never did I think this would be a profession of mine, but here I am 30 some years later, still involved in it and loving it every step of the way.
That's so amazing. So how old were you? Were you really little or?
I was 9, about to be 10, which in some of the dance world is later, but it didn't really matter. But yeah, I was 9 going on about 10.
That's so awesome. And just that you instantly sort of fell in love and knew that it was this is what I need to be doing. And this is it. So you then obviously continued to dance and to compete and that sort of thing. And for some of our listeners, I suspect a lot of the listeners come from more sort of Western type dance styles, in terms of ballet, contemporary and things like that. So can you just tell us a little bit about the Irish dance world in terms of what that looks like from especially a competition perspective? Because I know I work with Irish dancers, so I'm fairly familiar with the structure of it, but it is different than sort of our more North American competition dance scene.
Yeah, this is a great question. And I appreciate this because I think one of the distinguishing factors about Irish dancing and many other forms of dance is it is rooted in a traditional art form. And so a lot of what we do, a lot of what we wear is based in those traditions. And so I think sometimes when we see it, first off, we're like, whoa, what is happening there? But it really comes from that, the great honor of carrying on that tradition. So it starts, most young kids will start in their dance classes once a week and they'll learn, your basic jig, a soft shoe dance. That's the The gilly is what it's called, but it's a black, kind of like a soft shoe in ballet. And so you start with that. And then as you progress, you start learning the hard shoe, which is like a tap shoe, but instead of the taps that you'll see on a tap shoe, it's a more flexible shoe with a fiberglass tip and heel. And so then you also add on that. So we've got the soft shoe, we've got the hard shoe, and then you also do group dancing, which is called Kaylee dancing, which can be with a variety number of people, 4, 8, 16, or just kind of an unlimited number of people. And so you start typically recreationally, but for just like other forms of dancing, then there is a big competitive scene, which is where we have seen a lot of the progression in Irish dancing and what the demands are of it, because of people trying to push those boundaries. And you're going to see with any sort of competitive sport, art, whatever it is. And so now what a lot of dancers are involved in is they go to local competitions called a feis. And then from there, you can qualify for the regional competitions and Oireachtas for your national competitions, and then to the world championships. So you see a lot of those dancers going through this year-long competitive program as well. And that's what I would say most dancers are a part of. There is always recreational. There's the performance element that is really important that we see, popularized by a lot of the commercial dance shows like Riverdance, Lord of the Dance, Michael Flatley, all of that. And so there's a lot more outlets now for Irish dancing than what it was, before it started. And it really changed a lot. I believe it was in the late 90s is when Riverdance first came on the scene. And so Irish dancing as a whole completely changed during that. So I started before that and then saw that as a kid growing up of how that changed what we were doing, what we were wearing, what the performances looked like, how intense your competitive scene was. So we've seen a lot of change too in this last, 30 years with the art form.
Yeah, for sure. And then for you, like growing up, you said sort of most kids start more recreationally. So that I assume is maybe a bit more performance based. And I know at least locally where I live, a lot of those performances center around St. Patrick's Day and things like that. There's a lot of opportunities for like community performances then. And then when or how did you sort of transition into more of the competitive scene, or were they occurring at the same time where it was like performance based and competitive at the same time?
Yeah, for Irish dancing, they are pretty parallel and you do it both throughout the year. So yeah, St. Patrick's Day is not a day for us. It is like an entire month of performances and getting ready for it. But throughout the year, you also have other celebrations or, people want Irish dancers at their party or, at the halftime of a basketball game or some sporting event. And so there's a lot of opportunities for schools now as Irish dancing has become more popularized. And it really does run kind of there's no season for performance and season for competition, which is can be challenging for our bodies too with Irish dancing, but it pretty much runs all year long, both with the competitive scene. If you're competing at a high level, you're competing at that high level year round, and the performances. So there's no big kind of break season for most dancers.
Yeah, which is such a great point because that makes it a bit challenging, I think, for dancers to figure out like when they potentially can build a break into their schedule. And hopefully it's not that they have an injury and so they've had to take themselves away and it's kind of like a forced break, but where they can be a little bit proactive about it. And I know some of the dancers I work with will choose to like miss some of the regional, like they kind of like almost plan it out where they'll be like, okay, I'm going to do these regional events, but I'm not going to do this one because I want to have a bit of a break where it's less intense. They're probably still dancing, but it's kind of less intense if they're building up to, different events, whether it's like the North American Championships or Worlds or things like that. But it does make it challenging because, it certainly is kind of happening year round, it seems like, which I mean is also the case in other dance genres, although we've traditionally had a more like the spring is competition season. That's really shifted. And now a lot of the big competitions, especially the ballet ones like IADMS and stuff, like start in the fall. They have early dates then. So dancers are basically dancing year round.
And it's an interesting, as it changes, and this is life, as it changes of us trying to dance safely and be able to manage that. It's been interesting as people become more aware, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, but as they become more aware of how we shift the entire industry too, and how we make those decisions and have those conversations. And so I do see that becoming more aware because people have learned from maybe some negative impacts, but it is that like deciding, the local fash, you could probably compete at one every weekend. You'd be traveling, but they are so much more available now, which is great. When I was dancing, I think we went to 5 a year. You could go all the time now. And so it is making those decisions of like, no, let's kind of lay low this, this month, these couple months so that, we can allow our body to rest or focus on other things or play other sports, whatever that is.
For sure. I'm also curious, so I've talked a lot on the podcast and just also on my social media feeds and things like that in the past about the lack of regulation within the dance world. But I think from what I understand, that's slightly different in Irish and actually in Highland dance as well, because your competitions are more international. Like there is this like sort of qualification. So there's a little bit, from what I understand, more like standard marking schemes and things like that, which doesn't exist in sort of the more North American competition dance, where you go to one competition and the awards are bronze, silver, gold, and you go to another competition and it's triple, diamond, platinum, bedazzled, something or other, like all of the awards. But from an Irish perspective, because they are qualifiers, like the regionals are qualifiers for, like, say, North American, and then that's a qualifier for Worlds and all of that. Do you find that has a positive effect in the Irish dance world in the sense that there's maybe a little bit more ability to regulate things or to have things more standardized across the board? Or is it maybe not there yet?
I do. And like, yes and no for every question, I'm sure. Fair. So there are multiple different organizations within Irish dance and within the competitive scene. One of the largest is the CLRG. And, I think with any organization, anytime that you're judging an art form, there's going to be some discrepancy in what we are judging. Unlike gymnastics, unlike ice skating, there aren't certain elements that you need to do in a routine in Irish dancing. It is, you need to be on time, you need to showcase your skills, but it's really up to each adjudicator. And so each different Irish dance organization will put in place different regulations where, at a world championships, we might have 7 judges and they'll drop the low and the high score. So if there was any sort of major discrepancy, it's not going to really, change a dancer's competitive outcome that much. So there is a lot of regulation there. And I think one of the benefits of that is it gives the dancer, the families, the teachers a very clear pathway that in order for me to qualify for this, I need to do X, Y, and Z. And that across the board is very clear of what those stepping stones along the competitive scene are. Again, they're going to be different for each organization and they will change over time. And so we do see that changing. But there's always a reason for why it needs to change. And so I think that's really helpful for Irish dancers just to have that clear idea of what they're working for. If they are setting goals that happen to be competitively based, I want to qualify for Worlds, I want to, recall at this competition, they can do that very easily because it's very black and white what those roles are.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is so interesting because I think that's one of the things that's maybe missing in like our competition world is a little bit of a lack of standardization. And so then you hear people debating about, whether we should be focusing more on like tricks and things like that in dance, because those seem to be like awarded more, but then you're like losing some of the artistry. And like, it's all so subjective because there aren't even like standardizations for certain levels or things like that, which I realize it is an art form. But like you said, in gymnastics or figure skating or things like that, they have like the technical elements and scores, and then they have the artistic scores separate from that. And in dance, it's all kind of wrapped up into one. But I do see like Highland and Irish and some of those having just like a little bit more clarity in terms of like what those standards are, like you said, like how you progress, which I think is really nice for dancers to kind of, just be able to like use that and kind of know like, okay, this is where I need to go if I want to set those goals and that's what I want to achieve. So interesting. I love, learning more about the ways that it is similar and different from other styles of dance and other dance communities. I want to pivot and just shift gears very, very slightly and hear a little bit more. You have a pretty interesting story about like kind of how you then ended up more in the post-secondary world, and especially like your undergrad, I think is really cool to kind of share that path and how you ended up where you are. And like you sort of alluded to in your introduction, it kind of led to like where you are now. So do you want to share a little bit with the listeners about, that path and that story?
Sure. So I was lucky to grow up. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio in the States, and danced with a woman, Mary McGang, who still has her school for 40 some years, the McGang Irish Dancers. And I was really fortunate because she allowed me to explore and try things and teach different classes. And so I always was very curious and always kind of was leading my own path and like, oh, this would be interesting. This would be interesting. And she really allowed me to harvest that. When I went to school, so I did my undergrad at Ohio State, and I always just remember being so jealous of all my friends who were like, I'm going to go to this school and I'm going to study this, who had a clear path. And I never felt like I had a clear path, but I felt like I was so curious about Irish dancing and what we could do in that world. At that time, this is 25 years ago, like a dance science was maybe there at a few schools. And I can remember talking to different advisors, and they were like, you're making a mistake by going into dance. You're making a mistake. And I was like, well, something doesn't sit, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I went and I was doing some, getting all my general ed done. And then I realized that I went to Ohio State in Columbus, Ohio for my undergrad, and they had a program then called the Personalized Study Program. Whereas if there was a topic of study that you wanted to major in that they didn't have, and they had course load, that you could create your own undergrad degree. So I ended up designing this program on Irish dance education, where I studied the science component. So your anatomy, physiology, kinesiology, dance education, Irish history, business, and dance performance. And I used those 5 pillars then to build this undergrad degree. I then had to go get an advisor who could sign off on it. I got so many no's and like, no, I just don't know that, Irish dance is really something you should study, until I met with an advisor, and she had a neighbor who was a competitive Irish dancer. And she said, oh, I get it. Like, I get why this is necessary. And she said, absolutely, I will support you. And she was in the kinesiology department. And so she was able to sponsor me then through my undergrad. It is not to go remiss without me saying, I had 2 very supportive parents who, I'm sure when I told them that I was going to make up my own undergrad in Irish dance education, they were probably like, oh, geez, I have 3 older sisters. So I'm sure that they were like, if there was a daughter that we could bet she would not use her undergrad degree, I'm sure it was me. But I did that, was so invested. And while I was in doing my undergrad, I was signed by the Trinity Irish Dance Company, who's based out of Chicago. So I left school and began touring full time. And the threat seems extreme, but the threat from my dad was, you need to finish in 4 years. You need to finish your undergrad degree. You need to make sure that your rent is paid for with your roommates and have health insurance, all of those things. And I was like, I'm on it. So I figured that out, was able to do my classes, and this is before online classes, and was able to do some summer classes, all of that. I went and toured. I came back, and then to finish my program, I would go to school during the week. I would tour on the weekends. Then when I graduated, I moved to Chicago so that I could tour full time, be dancing. I started working with then the Trinity Irish Dance Company, while I was out on tour, as more on the administrative side, preparing for tours, training dancers, all of that. A big thing in the Irish dance world is becoming a certified TCRG, is the certification to become a dance teacher that then your students can compete. So while I was touring, I studied and took the TCRG exam, passed that. So then I also became a dance teacher. That's something that I had done kind of always. I always say I probably started teaching when I was 14, 15. Again, I was really lucky that my dance teacher gave me those opportunities. And so then I started teaching when I was home. And as I was phasing out of dancing professionally and teaching more often, then I started to become less interested in the artistic side of Irish dancing, the steps, the competition. And I became much more interested in how we were moving, and realizing that when I was yelling the things, turn out your feet, kick higher, that me yelling louder had no effect on the dancer actually doing any of those things. So I started to become way more interested in how the body works, how we can actually effectively train dancers to improve their technique and help them have safer dance practices. Because a lot of what we are doing is based out of Irish dancing. We get a lot of overuse and we get a lot of issues from dancers trying things that their bodies are not prepared for. So I went back to school, did my master's in exercise science, and started target training, which now what I do full time is I work primarily with Irish dancers on the strength and conditioning, stability work, that kind of thing, in order to supplement their dance technique training. And it is so rewarding because there's always so much for me to learn, so much to learn in the Irish dance world. It's come a long way, and I'm excited for the next generations to continue pushing that needle because it's necessary in Irish dancing. But it's been a fun pathway, and it's been fun to now look back at my professional journey and kind of see how this all made sense. But every step of the way, it was like, well, I'm going to try this, and this is working. Like, let's keep going. So it's been a fun. None of it was planned. And so when people are like, well, what did you do? How? I had no plan. It just kept being, I've always really listened to my intuition, and it always just felt right along the way.
Yeah. And I feel like that's where our stories are actually quite similar in the, from the dance world. But then both of us were like, wait a second, we're really curious about more of like the biomechanics. How does this work? Like what actually is going on physiologically, like those types of things. I think we have similar interests in that realm. And then, like you said, also like it was not always planned, but just like the next step. And I think that's partly just like the time we're in, like the world of dance just in general as a whole is rapidly evolving and has rapidly evolved in the last like 10, 20 years. And so I feel like we've just had to roll with that because we're kind of like in it right now, like where it's like this time of really rapid change and most of it positive change, because I think for a long time we've been really far behind the sports world or other kind of, realms where they've just been a little bit further advanced in terms of like implementing the science and the research, and dance is kind of catching up. So it's changed really rapidly, or is currently changing, and it's fun to be part of it. But then, like you said, there's no planning what's going to happen because we're just like, all right, well, what's the next thing? Let's see where we can go. So that's awesome. I think, there's a lot of parallels between our stories, but in different genres of dance.
Yes.
Can you tell us just a little bit more about like target training in terms of like what it is? Like, I know you have like online programming, but I think you also do some in-person programming. Like what does the programming look like?
So I started with a program called the 10-week workout. And this is 10 years ago when I started target training. And it started with this 10-week workout that ran parallel to our, what I'm going to call our majors season. So our regional, national, and world championships. So that it could run parallel to help prepare the dancers for those competitions. And that is something I have always run during this time. I used to run it only in person, and this was, pre-COVID. And with COVID, awful for a million reasons. One of the benefits, and that it opened for a lot of people and for a lot of organizations like Target Training, like what you do, is that then people became more aware of programs that they can be taking use of online. And so all of my programs transitioned to Zoom. For me personally, it was easier because I was driving every day of the week to the south side of Chicago, west side of Chicago, north side of Chicago, to Milwaukee. And it's, I'm in the car then for 2 or 3 hours to go teach for 2 hours. And so it was not that effective as a use of time. Now, it's really useful for the dancers to be on Zoom. I think there are benefits to being on Zoom. There are benefits definitely to being in person as well. For the amount that an Irish dancer at that level, at a regional, national, world championship level, they are at the studio a lot. And so between school and being at the studio, they don't have a lot of time. And I'm a big advocate for let's be more efficient with what we're doing. And a part of that can be being online, that they can come home from school, set up a spot in their bedroom, sign on to class, and get going. So I do Zoom programming with these 10-week workouts. We do special clinics for different specific techniques. I'm sure this is across many dance genres, but for Irish dancing, what will happen is dancers will need assistance with, their turnout, keeping their arms in, curling in the back, different techniques that their dance teacher is either commenting on or they're getting comments from adjudicators. One of the wonderful things we have at local competitions is that dancers get written comments from the judge. So you want to know why, yes, so you want to know why you got this score. Oh, it says I've got to work on my toe height and my explosiveness or whatever it is. So we do special techniques, like technique clinics or master classes for that. And then, so that's one part of it. The other part is I have an on-demand training center, the Target Training Online Institute. And this was really created as a way for a dancer who may not learn. Basically, everybody's going to learn differently, and how we learn and what we also have time for. So I've got the Zoom classes that they can log on for an hour, 4 times a week, up to 4 times a week. And then we've got the on demand, which let's say you're a morning person, you want to get up before school and do 20 minutes. Great. That's an option for you. So we have, those are our 2 main programs that we run. And then depending on the time of year, and what the needs are of the community at that time, we'll run other programs. But those are our 2 big ones. And really what is happening 3 times a year are the big, our big major seasons, but really throughout the entire year.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool. And I love that it's a mix of like on demand and then also like live classes. Cause like you said, different people need different things. And some people just like want to follow along with something, but some people want to be like live on camera or need that like correction and that sort of thing. So that's awesome.
I can understand the, in the motivation. Are you extrinsically motivated, intrinsically? And so do you need a coach helping you through it and giving you motivation? I get that. Some days I need that. Or are you just, I want to dig in, put in these videos and I have this list of videos I want to do. I get that. And so there's no right way. And I think that's important for everybody to learn, is that there's different ways that we can do this, and what they enjoy the most is what they're going to do. If it's a struggle to get them to do it, they're not going to do it. And so at the end of the day, I want them to be training in a way that's going to support their goals, their body, their mindset. And so if I can give them different options, that's what's going to be best for them.
Yeah. And do you have like an average age of clients you work with? Like, I assume it's similar to me where it's sort of like that adolescent-ish like dancer or whatever, but like, is that correct? Or are there more adults participating or?
So you definitely more adolescent, but it is changing, I think. And this is something that I found interesting just watching the Olympics, was what we're seeing in the change in gymnastics with that age, the mean age getting older. I'm also seeing Irish dancers' careers in the competitive scene being longer as they learn how to train more efficiently, more effectively for their bodies and their schedules. They're able to prolong those competitive careers. Whereas when I was dancing, you were pretty much done competing when you were 18. Some people went on, but it was not common. It is now like more common to be dancing through university years, to be dancing after that, and to make that a part of it. So really all ages, there's, it's really changing now, but the hub is probably that adolescent age.
Yeah. And that makes sense. And we're seeing that in other realms of dance as well. And even in the professional dance world, like in ballet companies where, most dancers were retiring by the time they were like 30 or 32. And now a lot of dancers are dancing into their 40s. And so companies are having to like adapt and come up with like maternity leave policies and like, return to dance post-maternity leave and things like that, that in the past wasn't really a thing because dancers would retire before they would ever even consider starting families or things like that. So there's definitely a shift that's happening. And like you said, we were seeing that during the Olympics for sure. Not just in gymnastics, but in other sports too. Like there was just, you can see the longevity as we sort of implement more of the science and research and, learning to work with our bodies, we can absolutely prolong careers. So that's interesting that you're seeing that shift in your business as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm going to, again, shift gears just a tiny bit and want to talk a little bit about one of your like specific targeted programs. So you were a participant in one of my programs in the spring. I can't even remember when that was. But anyway, the Flexibility Foundations program. And then from that, you were able to like take that information and turn it into a specific like flexibility clinic for your dancers. And I wondered if you just wanted to talk a little bit about that and sort of the results maybe is not the right word, but sort of like the buy-in that you had from the dancers in terms of like implementing that type of work with Irish dancers.
I would love to talk about this because I think that this is something that every Irish dance teacher, every dance teacher and again, I'm not teaching the Irish dancing. I'm in a different world, but I think what I ended up doing is something that every dance teacher should be doing. So my background is mostly in the strength and conditioning world. I know the importance of flexibility for Irish dancers. We have high demands for high kicks, high clicks, and a lot of dancers get injured from forcing it. And what I was saying earlier about being curious about things and kind of recognizing that our traditional ways of stretching is really not that effective. And we're having trouble with keeping dancers kind of to a safe program with that. I knew that there was more to it. And I, consume a lot of everything. I'm reading a lot. I'm listening to all the podcasts and things. And you started talking about really the importance of the nervous system. And it was something that as you would talk about it on your podcast, through your weekly emails, I was like, yes, yeah, like this makes sense. And when I would look at flexibility before this, it kind of made sense, but I always felt like something was missing. And so then the way that you laid it out, I was like, oh, this is a no-brainer. And this is something, so working with flexibility for dancers, for Irish dancers that's what I can only talk about really. Yeah. It is a struggle for a lot of them. And so we have offered flexibility programs in the past. And when I did it, there was always still a part of me that was like, I'm missing something for these. I know there's more to this. So once I heard you, I think I actually did first, I read it in your newsletter. And then I signed up. You had a free class that I signed up for and did that. And I right away was like, oh, I need this. And I am someone who would be the person in class who was probably always asking why. Like, oh, but why? Like, why? Yeah. And I'm a very tactile learner. I want to feel it. I want to touch it. I want to experience it. And it was so helpful because then I did your program and everybody's busy. I sometimes went live, was watching recorded. I could go back and watch things. And you would explain first the principle. Let me help you understand your bodies. And it wasn't in a way that would be over anybody's head. You do not need a background in science, but you need to know the importance of how your body is moving and how it's responding to outside triggers, to whatever it is. And then explain what we need to do and how that is applicable to your dance environment. And the programming of it, all of that was included. And so it was a no-brainer then for me to then incorporate that into a program that we had, but a totally different lens on it. And so the big thing was like that connection between the nervous system and the mobility is transformative for these dancers. And so what we would see is immediately just talking through it, not only was it impactful for the end result, which is what they all want, they want better flexibility, but they felt good doing it. And it wasn't a struggle of, this is painful and I hate this. Like that is not what the response was from it. And so it's something that I would really encourage every dance teacher to do as a more efficient way to incorporate flexibility into their classes or to run an extra program because you don't have time. Like no one has time. There is not enough time in a dance class. There's not enough time. And it was so simple and effective what you went through that it would make sense. Like to me, I'm like, why did I do anything else before this? It's like, that was really a waste of time. And so now I'm like, yeah, everybody needs to be doing this. Like sign up. So yeah, I'm so grateful for it because I just think you have a very clear way. And I've said this to you before, but a very clear way of delivering information. And it is then so easy for someone else to take that and apply it to whatever they're using.
Yeah. And that's what I loved so much about seeing you like immediately take the information and then make it into a program that is applicable specifically for Irish dancers, because the program, how it's delivered in terms of like the actual flexibility foundations program is not specific to a genre of dance or even an age of dance or anything like that. It really is like more of this is how the body works. This is like how the nervous system works and all of that. But then teachers and whether it's a dance teacher or more like a strength and conditioning coach or that type of thing, can take that information and apply it to their specific dancers and to their specific population. And it was really cool to watch you immediately, like very action taking oriented. It wasn't like, oh, this is cool. Maybe next year I'll think about revamping my program. You were like, oh, right away, we're going to take this information and make it really, really applicable to Irish dancers specifically. So the way that you're implementing that information with Irish dancers is going to be different than a teacher who's teaching maybe more jazz or contemporary or like different styles. But that's kind of the purpose of the program, or like the ultimate goal of the program, is that it can be applicable to all dancers of different sort of genres, or basically I always say it's like applicable to anybody who has a nervous system. But it was really neat to watch and to then like get the feedback from your dancers being like, oh yeah, this like isn't as terrible as like, you know, previous flexibility programs, or like the stretching that hurts, or like that type of thing. Because I think that is a big barrier to getting dancers to be consistent with flexibility programming, is that like, why would we want to do something consistently that feels terrible in our body? Like when we're trying to sort of force our body to do something that does not feel good. So yeah.
And I loved your point too, because I think, if somebody is outside of the, what we would call like the traditional dance world, you know, like your ballet, contemporary, as someone who has lived outside of that world and immersed myself also in that world, trying to get more research to kind of pull over little bits and pieces to the Irish dance world, I would not hesitate whatsoever. So if someone was, you know, a soccer player, someone wanted to increase their flexibility, if they were, it would be like, it's again, what you're saying, like, it's not just dance. And even me, like, I don't Irish dance anymore. But I'm doing it along with them. I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to do this every day. My body feels so good. Like I was even like, okay, I need to do this along with them every day because it feels so good. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a good point, that it doesn't have to just be for dancers. Like obviously it's designed with the lens of dancers in mind, but I do sometimes get people taking the course who are more like gymnastics coaches or rhythmic gymnastics or things like that. And it's totally applicable to any of that as well, because it's very much, like I said, taught at you know, this is the body and this is like how the nervous system works and how it's influencing mobility and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, I just love how you took that and ran with it and then could create like your own program to offer specifically for your dancers that was like so niche to them, but incorporating that information.
And for our program too, it was literally immediately after yours finished. And it was about 2 months leading up to our North American Championships. And so the timing worked very well. Thank you for that. And it just led right up to the North American Championships for us, so that it was super simple for me to run that program parallel with the other, like the strength, stability, that kind of work that the dancers were already doing. And so it just was real easy to translate that over.
Yeah. And I think it fits super nicely with that work if dancers are used to it, because it is based somewhat in, you know, active mobility and things like that. Like there's obviously other components to it as well, but that fits in nicely when dancers are already doing other strengthening work and stability work, that then to add in that piece of it just feels like it's like that, the last piece of the puzzle, as opposed to something that feels really like contradictory to the other work that they're already doing. So that's like really cool. Yeah. How you can kind of offer those programs simultaneously and then be able to sort of have the dancers participating and stuff. So yeah, thank you for that. For people listening, as we're yammering on about this program, there is going to be another round of it running in September. I will put more details in the show notes, but registration is going to be opening at the end of August. I can't remember what date it is. I think it's August 25th. The registration opens, maybe the 24th. Anyway, keep your eye on social media, on the email newsletter and all of that, because there will be another round of that opening soon. I am aware of the time and don't want to keep you for too long. So I usually finish off guest episodes of the podcast with 5 kind of rapid fiery type questions. So if you are willing to indulge me and answer them, they're kind of fun. I feel like the first question I might already know the answer to, but the first question is, what's your favorite genre or style of dance?
I mean, my instinct is going to say Irish dancing, but it really could depend on the day. Like
fair.
Every day I see something, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's beautiful. That's amazing. I love watching bodies move. So I'm going to say Irish dancing, but that's an easy answer.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you rather be on the stage or in the studio?
Oh, I'm going to say in the studio. I think one of the most magical things is the process, and whether that is as a soloist or as a group. I think that process, there is a definite high of being on the stage, but the process in the studio is beautiful.
Amazing. If you could dance with or share the stage with any dancer, past or present, who would it be and why? And
my first instinct is my husband, but that would be really funny because he is not a dancer. He is an actor. But
that's really sweet, though.
It brings me a lot of joy to dance with him because it just makes me laugh. But he's not a dancer.
That's fair.
I'm going to say him.
Okay. I love it. I love it. What is one thing that you would go back and tell your younger self as a dancer?
Oh, there's so much. There's so much. I think I would go with, this is going to sound really cheesy, but kind of follow your heart, follow your intuition. And I think sometimes it can feel a little odd to step out of the box that is there, but that's where all the really amazing and beautiful things happen. So I would say that sounds real cheesy, but follow your heart.
I don't think it sounds cheesy. I think that's a great answer. All right. Finally, last question. If there was one thing that you could change about the dance world as it is right now, what would it be?
Oh, I would say, and this is happening in some areas, I would say I wish it would continue to grow in a healthy way. And that is happening in some ways. And that I'm talking, again, from the Irish dance world, from a dancer health perspective, both mental and physical health, from a competitive perspective and fairness in judging. And so I just maybe it's more of my hope for the dance world, is that it continues to grow in a really healthy and positive way.
Yeah, I love that so much. I could not agree more. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat. I feel like we could talk for hours and hours and hours about everything and anything under the sun. Before I let you go, what is the best way for listeners to connect with you if they want to learn more about your story or target training or want to train with you or all the things?
Yeah. First, thank you for having me. I'm a big fan all around. And again, I could sit and chat with you about all things dance, Olympics, whatever, all day long. But if you want to find out more about target training or working with me, Target Training Dance, either the website, targettrainingdance.com, Target Training Dance on all the social medias, you can find me there.
Amazing. And I will link those in the show notes so people have all of that information if they want to come and find you. And once again, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. It's always fun to chat with you. And thank you, everyone, for listening. I know you could be doing anything with your time, so I appreciate your support. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.